responsibility of this board is to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to preserve the wetlands and to accommodate economic activities so as to prevent that spoliation. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Roadley?
Here.
Mr. Lukens?
Here.
Mr. Lukens is here for Mr. Waltrip. Mr. Gussman?
Here.
Mr. Hughes?
Here.
Mr. Apperson?
Here.
We've got the minutes from last month. Any corrections, deletions?
Okay.
So the minutes are as prepared. And we have public hearing, WJPA 190032. And Mr. Long, I guess you're going to do the show all night tonight.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, members of the board, Mr. Chair. As Trevor Long, James City County Stormwater Watershed Planner, here to present WJPA-19-0032, 7612 Uncle's Neck. Ms. Carla Havens of Mid-Atlantic Resource Consulting has applied for a wetlands permit on behalf of Ms. Teresa Whelan to construct a stone breakwater with beach nourishment on property located at 7612 Uncle's Neck within the Chickahominy River watershed and the Uncle's Neck subdivision. The applicant has proposed the construction of a 100 linear foot breakwater with 2,000 square feet of beach nourishment to combat shoreline erosion occurring on property. An estimated 74 cubic yards of sand material is proposed as part of the beach nourishment and will be sourced from an upland location. Project limits of the breakwater extend into approximately 30 square feet of vegetated wetlands. A pier, boathouse, and access way are also associated with this project, however, are not under review by this board. Staff met with the applicant in early 2019 to discuss shoreline management on the property. The scope of this project is within jurisdictional wetlands for this board, and impacts to vegetated wetlands are anticipated. Therefore, an application for a permit was submitted through the Virginia Marine Resource Commission and processed by the local wetlands board. As published in the Virginia Register on July 11, 2005, the revised Wetland Mitigation Compensation Policy and Supplemental Guidelines regulating 4 VAC 20-390-10, Virginia, as a Chesapeake Bay program partner, is committed to achieve a no net loss of existing wetlands acreage and function in the signatories' regulatory programs. In order for a proposed project to be authorized to impact wetlands and compensate for the wetland loss in some prescribed manner, the following 3 criteria must be met. All reasonable mitigative efforts, including alternative siting, which would eliminate or minimize wetland loss or disturbance, must be incorporated in the proposal. The proposal must clearly be water dependent in nature, and the proposal must demonstrate clearly its need to be in the wetlands and its overwhelming public and private benefits. If the proposed project cannot meet one or more of the 3 above criteria, the project must be denied or must occur in areas outside of the wetlands. Should it satisfy all 3 criteria, however, compensation for the wetland loss is required. The sequence of acceptable mitigation options should be as follows: on-site, off-site within the same watershed, mitigation banks in the same watershed, or a payment of an in lieu fee. If compensation is required, it should be a condition of the permit. Staff has reviewed this application against the mitigation policy and finds that this project meets the 3 criteria outlined in the policy and finds that there is a potential to disturb vegetated wetlands. For this reason, a minimum of 5,000 square feet of the beach nourishment area is requested to be planted by staff. Salt meadow hay, salt meadow cordgrass, black needle rush, common 3-square, arrow arum, and pickerel weed are all acceptable plant species. Staff does recommend approval of this application, and should the board wish to approve the application, staff suggests the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary local, state, and federal permits required for the project. A surety in the amount of $450 shall guarantee the no net loss wetland policy as outlined in 4 VAC 20-390-10. The surety shall be in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office, and a minimum of 5,000 square feet of the beach nourishment area must be planted. All development activities located in the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3 floodplain area regulations of the James City County zoning ordinance and receive all required approvals and permits prior to the commencement of such activities. And the wetlands permit for this project shall expire on August 14th, 2020 if construction has not begun, with extensions, with an extension of the permit written request written and submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than July 3rd, 2020, 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. I'm going to have a brief presentation on your monitors. Again, the applicant request is to construct a stone breakwater with beach nourishment at 7612 Uncle's Neck here in the Uncle's Neck subdivision along the Chickahominy River. Aerial photograph showing the approximate location of the beach nourishment with breakwaters occurring here in the water. Topography indicating the steep nature of the bank with excessive erosion occurring on it, and the floodplain as it occurs on this property. The existing site plan, as it has been proposed by the applicant, with beach nourishment highlighted here in yellow, vegetated wetlands just to the right of it in green, with the stone breakwater occurring or being proposed in gray. This cross section of the beach nourishment and breakwater show the essential project limits. Some site photographs, approximate area of the beach nourishment. Here you can see a snapshot of the extensive erosion on the bank as the current conditions lie. This is part of the breakwater, I believe. Further out, also this PVC pipe indicating the breakwater, and this one here also with vegetated wetlands occurring here. From the upland bank, looking down on the vegetated wetlands, here's PVC pipe. And looking towards the project as a whole, very well illustrating the erosive nature of the bank and need for beach nourishment and a breakwater. Again, staff does recommend approval of this project, given that all other necessary federal, state, local permits are required for the project. That a surety in the amount of $450 shall be required to guarantee the no net loss of wetland policy and the mitigation plantings. That all development activities located in the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3 floodplain area regulations. That the wetlands permit for this project shall expire on August 14th, 2020 if construction has not begun, with a request for an extension to the permit written and requested no later than July 3rd, 2020. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the board may have at this time.
Questions? I have one. Are they going to put a pier or access to the breakwater?
Access to the breakwater?
Yes,
Or
over elevated access so they can walk, put a boat out past the breakwater.
yes, they will. And the pier will be located right here. And access to the pier will be heard before the board in the Chesapeake Bay portion of this meeting.
So the portion of the pier that's going over the will not be going over the wetlands, and that area is not being considered when you compute the whole amount of wetlands that will be planted. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Okay, thank you, sir. We'll open the public hearing. If anybody would like to speak to this, we'd be honored to hear you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm Carla Havens with Mid-Atlantic Resource Consulting, 1095 Cherry Row Lane, Plainview, 23156. Ms. Whalen purchased this property And I commend her for not wanting to slope the bank on a 3-to-1 and put a revetment at the base of it. If you've been out to the site, if you're facing the water, on the left-hand side, it's low, it rises up in the middle, and then it drops down on the right-hand side. And that's why we've got the marsh. If you look at the site plan that you have here, that's why we have the marsh on the right-hand side as you're looking at the photo. And where it says oak, Trevor had a really nice picture of where that oak tree is. It drops down and slopes. Wilbur Jordan and I discussed many different options, and Ms. Whalen wanted to go with a minimalistic, no bank grading, just try to stop the erosion or minimize erosion offshore, and that's what we came up with was the, I think it's a, 100 by 20, breakwater. And unfortunately, your pictures are not low tide. I think they're a high tide. But basically, the breakwater is almost all of it is channelward of mean low water. Thank you. Yes. So the vegetation, the vegetated impacts are very minimal. And Trevor, you had mentioned 5,000 square foot of replanting. I'm not going to say Ms. Whalen's opposed to it. I just don't, I don't know where those numbers are coming from. The Bay Act implications, that addresses the 2 walls that are accommodating the access to the pier, and I understand you'll do that when you put your other hat on. But we just thought this was a really warm, fuzzy, kumbaya moment for stabilizing the shoreline here instead of just cutting the whole thing back and putting a revetment like much of the neighborhood has done.
Carla, what are the water depths offshore there? Is it deep? Is that why we're not seeing more of these structures along this stretch?
There is such variability. If you remember when we first started doing shoreline structures along here, first application you had, they had a really steep drop off. It got really mucky and then dropped off. Ms. Whalen's, it goes out and then it drops, and that's why Wilbur and I placed staked the breakwater where we did. The channelward most PVC pipes is pretty much where low tide is on a normal situation. I've been out there multiple times, and the PVC has been exposed. So I haven't walked out like 20, 30 feet with a depth stick, but I know there's some variability. And I know when you get out to the end of the piers, it just drops off completely. That's why if you look at it overhead of all the piers, they only extend they all tend to extend a certain different distance because you hit deep enough water.
I noted on staff's plan view, we'd kind of shown the breakwater wrapping around, or at least there was a line depicting that, but this is just a 100-foot long structure. It doesn't wrap around on the ends.
That's correct. Yeah, and I think you had a good shot that showed the marsh as you're facing the river. The marsh on the right-hand side that ties into the holder's property. And see, I mean, we were out there 3 months ago, and now you look at the pictures and it's flourishing with vegetation. 3 months ago, not everything had emerged, but all right. So you could see the one PVC in the dark spot on the right, and the one on the left that's on the foreground of the pier there. At low tide, that's all just intertidal sand flat coming at you 100 feet. And you can see, hopefully you can see the silhouette of I think that was Black Needle Rush. We tried staying out of that as much as possible. And I don't know how much migrated into the footprint of the structure since we were out there staking the project. But the idea is to keep it as an offshore structure, not going subaqueous, backfill with beach quality, beach quality sand, and if you want us to sprig it, we'll sprig it, and not go in and just destroy that bank and take out all the trees, and, it's one of many solutions, and this is the one that Ms. Whalen wanted.
Would you say maybe in decades past, basically, the shoreline for this particular point here extended somewhat more into the river and had a more gradual slope into the river, and that was eroded away over time?
I have no idea. I believe James City County has an excellent record of previous aerial photos. The tree, that oak on the left, I don't doubt it just sloughed down the bank. I mean, it's not an uncommon sight to see. So I have no idea what the history of this is. 50 years, 100 years, 1,000 years.
When you see the cypress trees, you can assume that was high land at one time. The weather mature cypress tree, as you know, that was, and as you go up and down the river, the isolated cypress trees that come out into the water, into the river, that was all land at one time. It has to be, land for the cypress to germinate and grow there. That's how it got there to begin with.
Good to note. Uncle's Neck is on the eroding side of the Chick, and the marsh on the left
Right.
is on the accreting side of the Chick, so,
And the
it's-
channel is on the Uncle's Neck side. The channel for the
That-
river
that
there
is correct.
is on
Yep.
the Uncle's Neck. We've been up and down it many times. Yes, that's exactly where it is. It's interesting too, when you get to the Uncle's Neck Creek, typically there's a mud flat at the mouth of a creek, but there is a deep hole there at that particular location. The only one I know of on the Chickahominy that actually has not a mud flat, but a channel is right at the mouth of the creek. Or, I don't mean to be getting too far off subject, but just talking.
Sounds like a good place to fish.
It is, that's why we know.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. Does anybody else care to speak on this matter? Yes, sir. State your name, please.
My name is Jeffrey Madden. I'm with the Marine Resources Commission. I'm Allison today. And I'm curious, is there going to be any direct impact to vegetated wetlands as a result of the construction of this breakwater?
Mr. Long, you want to answer that?
I'll defer to Carla for exact impacts, if there are any. I believe we approximated about 30 square feet, but
I believe the whole idea was to keep it out of the vegetated wetlands, and I'm looking on sheet 16, Part 3, Appendices, continued. Please calculate, and it's number 3, please calculate square footage of encroachment over vegetated wetlands, and I put 0, because when we were out there, there was 0 vegetation there. The non-vegetated wetlands was 0, everything was subaqueous, which was 2,000 square feet. And I can give you the date and time that I was out there, if you want. It was January, February, March, it was May 7th, 2019 at 10 in the morning, and Wilbur and I staked this project. And I believe it was a standard low tide, it wasn't a super lunar or crazy lunar low.
Plenty of time for the vegetation to come up.
I'm sorry?
Plenty of time for the vegetation to come up. If it's going to be there, it would have been there at that time of the year, growing season.
Well, it was early May,
Yeah.
and
Yep,
and you could clearly see the marsh
right, exactly.
on the Holder side, and that's why we try to position it. Plus, I mean, we're dealing with the high peaked portion of the property. As I said, it has a high point, and then it tended to slope either side. Well, that high point is where you want to put your protection.
Okay.
Question, just
Yes, sir.
I'm curious about the construction, how this construction is going to be, actually how the breakwater is going to be constructed? I assume you're going to barge the material in, or are you going to come down, cut through the bank, and that would be your equipment access? That's my only other question.
David, would you like to take that one?
The Ches Bay portion of this project addresses the pier construction and the two retaining walls that serve as an access way to accommodate a golf cart for, I believe it's the mother-in-law. So that is going to be the access way initially, and then will be the future, that it will be the access way for the placement of the stone, and then the future retaining wall and access to the pier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to clarify the record.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, we'll close the public hearing and go to board discussion. Any problems? Anybody care to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Chairman, that we vote to grant permit WJPA 19-0032 7612 Uncle's Neck.
Okay, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Chairman, can I pause for a discussion? Not to belabor the point, but I'm just wanting to get it right. Ms. Havens described that if I'm looking at this correctly, that the breakwater is going between these two stakes on this picture.
My understanding, the breakwater is going to be at the outside stake.
Outside stake.
On this picture, in the shade to the right, as I'm looking at it, there's a PVC pipe. And to the left of that, channelward, there's a PVC pipe in front of the background boathouse. That's the Holders boathouse. That distance is 20 feet. The breakwater will be contained between those two PVC pipes and come towards the foreground 100 feet.
That's what I understood.
Yeah, this is not a low tide photo. This
Yeah.
is a high tide photo, and I think it's an exceptionally high tide photo.
The concern that I had is that the application as presented shows 2,000 square feet of subaqueous encroachment. Clearly, there's, because of the vegetated wetlands, there's a intertidal component here. So are we saying that was the 70 or 30 feet, 30 square feet? I mean, I don't know the answer to the question. There's a little bit of a conflict between what the application states and what we're seeing.
Yeah, so when we went out and looked at this, and I believe we went out at lower tides, however, it may have been slightly higher, and we calculated that number of about 30 feet. We were a little unsure with the PVC placement as to where the breakwater would go. On the assumption that it went further into those vegetated wetlands, we chose a safe number of 30. As staff, we would like to put it out there that if we could amend the conditions so that mitigation plantings or surety could be foregone at a time closer to construction. We saw vegetated wetlands come up when staff went out, but not when the applicant came out. So that if that would be something that the applicant would be interested in, staff could be amenable to that.
So determine the mitigation requirement just prior to construction
Yes, sir.
based upon the presence of vegetated tidal wetlands. Thank you.
Apologize. Breakwater is all, it starts at mean low water and goes channelward. That's mean low water. That's the stake on the right. That's the stake in front of the pier. The breakwater starts at mean low water and goes channelward. The
So by definition, there
nourishment,
shouldn't be vegetated tidal wetlands there.
right, but the nourishment is intertidal. And I'll leave it at that.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm not opposed to the application. I prefer breakwaters and beach nourishment. It's just I wanted to get clarity on what was being impacted. I think Mr. Long has provided a solution that if staff is able to review the site prior to construction to determine the area of vegetated wetlands that would be impacted either by the breakwater or the nourishment, and then that be added to the condition for vegetated reestablishment.
Oh, yeah, are you proposing to put that as a condition?
I am.
So would you like to state that?
So as a condition of the permit, I ask that staff visit the site prior to construction during the warmer months and determine the limits of vegetated wetlands, and then amend the permit condition for the reestablishment of vegetation to be commensurate with the existing wetlands that would be impacted, vegetated wetlands.
Okay. Do we all understand that?
Yes.
You want to make a motion to that effect?
Move.
Right, so we have a motion to grant staff's recommendation with the qualifier that they examine the property prior to installation of the riprap and determine, well, what the actual wetlands is and mitigate accordingly. Herbert? All right, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Okay. Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Mr. Gusman?
Yes.
Mr. Hughes?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Okay, now we'll move on to board consideration, WJP A180089.
New Mr. Chair, members of the board, Trevor Long here to present a surety release request for WJPA-18-0089. Mr. John F. Cox is requesting a one-year extension to WJPA 18-0089, formerly W20-18. Originally granted on April 11th, 2018, however, due to an unexpected death of his contractor, Mr. Cox has requested an extension in time to meet the approved conditions. However, staff overlooked getting this request to the April meeting, and staff therefore administratively extended the approval to this meeting. Staff concurs with this request with the stipulation that all permit conditions, except for the expiration date, be authorized and that the new date of expiration be May 8th, 2020. And I apologize, there are portions of that that do not run conducive with what is being presented. That was an old memo that seems to have gotten mixed in. Upon completion of the project, staff did go out and inspect the project, and much like the new request of condition put in the previous wetlands project that we just saw, a wetlands mitigation bank was, or wetlands mitigation was determined at the time to not have wetland impacts, therefore no mitigation was required. So the applicant has requested the release of this surety, and at this time we are bringing before the board for approval.
Do we have any questions for staff?
No questions.
Okay, up for board discussion, any issues, discussion? Somebody care to make a motion?
Motion to adopt the release of surety for Wetlands Board Case 18-0089.
Okay, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Mr. Gusman?
Yes.
Mr. Hughes?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Do we have any matters of special privilege? I don't think so. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We are adjourned.
Hey, I'd like to call to order the August 14th meeting of the James City County Chesapeake Bay Board. The responsibility of this board is to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to protect against and minimize pollution and deposition of sediments of wetlands, streams, and lakes in James City County, which are tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay. Ms. Parman, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Roadley?
Here.
Mr. Lukens?
Here.
Mr. Lukens is here for Mr. Waltrip. Mr. Gusman?
Here.
Mr. Hughes?
Here.
Mr. Apperson?
First order of business, the approval of the minutes from the July 10th meeting. Are there any additions, changes to the minutes? Okay, minutes stand approved. Our next order of business are public hearings, and our first public hearing is CBPA 19-0055.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long here to present CBPA 19-0055 at 10025 Sycamore Landing Road. Mr. Jeffrey Miller has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a detached garage on property located at 10025 Sycamore Landing Road within the Sycamore Landing subdivision and the Ware Creek watershed. Parcel was platted on June 10th, 1986, prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. The total lot size of this property is 1.23 acres, of which 40% is located within the RPA. The applicant has proposed the construction of a detached garage equating to 2,080 square feet, of which approximately 250 square feet impact the resource protection area. This case appeared before the July 10th, 2019 Chesapeake Bay Board meeting and has been revised to reposition the proposed shed further outside of the RPA. The proposed detached garage will be constructed out of 2 Connex box containers adjoined by a roof and will also serve as storage for the existing house and shed, of which is proposed to be removed. Due to the natural grade of the property, the garage will be elevated by rear supports and the remainder of the area underneath to be gravelled. This amount of impact would equate to 1 planting unit, to which the applicant has verbally agreed. The applicant has provided plans for a drip line irrigation trench to offset runoff from the impervious impacts from the garage. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a detached garage and finds that the application meets the conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14, and that the application should be heard before the board because the garage is considered accessory in nature. Therefore, this request must be considered by the board following a public hearing under the formal exception process. The exception granting body is permitted to require reasonable and appropriate conditions in granting the exception request in accordance with sections 23-14. Chesapeake Bay Board should fully consider Chesapeake Bay exception number CBPA 19-0055 as outlined and presented above, and may grant the exception with such conditions and safeguards as deemed necessary to further the purpose and intent of the county's Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be minor for the proposed development. Staff does recommend approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve this request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. The applicant must submit a mitigation plan that details the size, location, and name of the required plant materials, which shall be 1 canopy tree and 3 shrubs. The applicant must submit an erosion and sediment control plan for review and approval. If applicable, the applicant must apply for a land disturbing permit. A surety of $500 be paid and placed prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to ensure the mitigation requirements. And this exception request approval will become null and void if construction is not begun by August 14th, 2020, with written requests for an extension submitted no later than July 3rd, 2020, 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. Now, I'll divert your attention to the screen for a brief presentation. Again, the applicant requests to construct a detached garage, property located at 10025 Sycamore Landing Road within the Sycamore Landing subdivision. The York River can be seen here on the right. Aerial photograph showing the approximate project location for the proposal with the existing shed to be removed. And the topography of the site indicating the slope downwards towards the rear of the property. The resource protection area as it does affect this property. And the revised site plan showing the the shed and the impacts to the resource protection area. The shed being, which can be found here in yellow, and the proposed shed here in yellow with the existing shed to be removed in orange. Existing gravel driveway, which will be located outside of the RPA, and the existing drain field, which prohibits the shed from being brought up any further. The applicant has also moved the shed farthest to the side of the property, which should not extend into the building setback. A side view of the proposed plan. And an aerial drawing with the drip line surrounding the structure. Site photographs showing the existing shed and the approximate location where the proposed shed will go. Towards the rear of the shed and the storage area. Looking back towards the front of the property. Again, staff does recommend approval of this exception request, given that all other necessary local, state, and federal permits are required. That the applicant submit a mitigation plan congruent with staff requirements, that being 1 canopy tree and 3 shrubs, and that the applicant submit an erosion and sediment control plan and land disturbing permit if applicable. That a surety of $500 be in place to ensure the mitigation requirements, and this exception request approval become null and void if construction is not begun by August 14th, 2020, with written request for an extension submitted no later than July 3rd, 2020. Happy to answer any questions at this time.
New plan, how much of a difference in the encroachment is it?
Believe that the previous plan, if not all of the structure was located within the RPA, it was a very significant amount. So it's more than doubled in a reduction in size, being 200 square feet within. I believe the old plan did encompass all of the construction, so it would have had 2,080 square feet within the RPA.
So now we're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood about 150, 200 square feet.
Yes, approximately 250.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the staff? Okay, the public hearing is open on this. Would anyone like to speak on this issue before I close the public hearing? Any questions for the applicant?
Chairman, I appreciate Mr. Miller working with the board to reduce the impacts. I have no questions.
Mr. Chairman, I'd also like to say thank you to the builder and homeowner there for working with the board. Thank you.
All right, at this time, I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion from the board?
Oh, it looks pretty good to me compared.
Yeah, much better project. Thanks for doing that. Okay, can we have a motion?
Yes, sir, I'll make a motion to adapt staff recommendation to grant the exception to Chesapeake Bay Board case number CBPA 190055.
Okay, we have a roll call?
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Hughes?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for coming out. Next case is CBPA 19-0087.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long here to present CBPA 19-0087. Ms. Carla Havens of Mid-Atlantic Resource Consulting has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Ms. Teresa Wellen for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the grading of the bank for access to the beach and pier on property located at 7612 Uncle's Neck within the Uncle's Neck subdivision and the Chickahominy River. This parcel was platted in 2008 after the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. Total lot size of this property is 3.25 acres, of which 17% is located within the RPA. The applicant is proposing the grading of the existing bank in order, a portion of the existing bank in order to provide access to the beach and pier within the RPA. The proposed bank grading will be done at a 3-to-1 slope in an area of the access path and will equate to approximately 900 square feet of disturbance, of which 500 square feet are accounted for as access path. Disturbance being the grading and taking into account the access path portion as well. Bank grading will be concentrated only in the area of the access trail and will include the removal of 3 trees in the process. Staff met with the applicant in early 2019 in order to discuss the configuration of the access path and grading in order to minimize the amount of impacts to the RPA. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the grading of the bank for access to the beach and pier and finds that the application meets the conditions set forward in sections 23-11 and 23-14, and that the application should be heard by the board because the bank grading is considered accessory in nature. Therefore, this request must be considered by the board following a public hearing under the formal exception process. Per sections 23-11 and 23-14 of the county ordinance, a water quality impact assessment was submitted for the proposed project. The exception granting body is permitted to require reasonable and appropriate conditions in granting the exception request in accordance with sections 23-14. Chesapeake Bay Board should fully consider Chesapeake Bay exception number CBPA 19-0087 as outlined and presented above, and may grant the exception with such conditions and safeguards as deemed necessary to further the purpose and intent of the county's Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal will be minor for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval of this exception request with the following conditions incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. A surety of $500 be paid and in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney to ensure mitigation requirements. All development activities located in the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3 Floodplain Area Regulations of the James City County Zoning Ordinance and receive all required approvals and permits prior to commencement of such activities. This exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by August 14th, 2020, with written requests for an extension submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than July 3rd, 2020, 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. Bring your attention to the screen for a brief presentation. Again, the applicant request is to grade the bank for access at property located at 7612 Uncle's Neck. This is the Chesapeake Bay portion of the wetlands project that was brought before the board earlier. Chickahominy River comes into play right here. Aerial photograph of the parcel and the approximate location of the bank grading should be about right here. The topography of the site showing the steep nature of the bank, which was visualized during the wetlands portion with significant erosion occurring. The floodplain as it affects this property, and the resource protection area as it affects this property. The site plan.
I'm sorry, one question there. Can you tell me the contour interval on?
I believe the contour intervals are on 10s. However, I could confirm that more accurately at a later date or time.
2-foot contour is further
2
back
foot,
up.
okay.
Up the
Thank you.
slide.
The site plan, as it's been proposed, with the 100-foot RPA affecting the property here, and the proposed access path encroaching here with the edge of the slope here in green. Side view of the access way with vinyl siding. The approximate location of the accessway. And from the uplands, approximately where the accessway will start. Indicate here with PVC outlined in yellow. Again, staff does recommend approval of this exception request, given that all other necessary local, state, and federal permits are required. That a surety of $500 to ensure the mitigation plantings be submitted to the James City County to the James City County Treasurer's Office. That all development activities located in the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3, floodplain area regulations. And this exception request approval become null and void if construction is not begun by August 14th, 2020, with written request for an extension submitted no later than July 3rd, 2020. That is all. I'd be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Can you just review again, what's the width of the path and what's the width and the length of the path?
Sure. So the length of the path would be approximately 50 feet, with the width being 10 feet.
I couldn't follow. What's the vinyl sided access way? What's the vinyl? What?
Sure, I'll defer that question to the applicant. I feel she can best explain the construction of the access way.
Okay.
Will this be the path will be on the ground, or is any of it's going to be elevated on piers?
It will all be on the ground, as I understand it.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, at this time I'd like to open the public hearing. The applicant like to come forward and explain exactly what the path is. And I didn't follow. How high is the vinyl going to be? Is the vinyl lining the sides, or?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. I'm Carla Havens with Mid-Atlantic Resource Consulting. The accessway, the 10 by 50 foot accessway, is the only portion of the bank that's going to be cut. And the vinyl siding is the vinyl sheeting that is used for bulkheads. So it comes in 2-foot sections, it's tongue and groove, and instead of sticking it along the shoreline, it's going to go perpendicular to the shoreline, and it is going to line the access cut from the upland down to the pier. So you're going to be walking like down a hallway of sheeting.
Okay, so how high is this sticking up?
I can't answer that question. I don't know. I believe it's going to start out at ground level and then get taller and taller as you get closer to the pier elevation. But the pier elevation is 6 feet above mean low water, so it's not like you're going all the way down to the beach. It's not beach access, it's pier access. And it's going to be such that the mother-in-law it's either the mother or the mother-in-law, I'm sorry, can take a golf cart to the pier.
Okay, and there'll be, timber piles holding this up, right?
Yes. Instead of a bulkhead, it's a wall going inland into the upland instead of parallel to the shoreline, interfacing with the river.
Okay.
It's unusual, but it beats grading back the whole bank.
Can you tell me what the decking will consist of?
The decking on the pier will be timber, treated timber. The ramp is going to be, I believe it's wood chips. It's something that, it's not going to be paved or anything like that.
It's not like a slightly raised deck or anything like that. It's a
No.
cut through with, backfilled with something to prevent erosion and so forth down there.
Right, and that a golf cart can gain traction. It's an access way. It's just like a footpath, only it has walls. I don't know how else to explain it. It's unusual, but this is what, instead of grading the whole shoreline back, this is what they wanted to go. And I believe Trevor and Mike really liked the idea.
Yes. That's when Mike Wilson and I met with the applicant on site. This was the agreed or plan very similar to agreed method of gaining access to the pier, given we didn't want them to grade back the entire bank, so we found this to be a very amenable solution and meeting point.
I feel you've got, from the upper levels, you've got enough sheet flow coming off the side, so this won't become simply a gutter that drains all the property, or? That's kind of bad, but,
Clearly, you've not been to the site.
no, I haven't, no, I haven't.
Yeah. The bank is sloughing in chunks
Yes.
down. And as you know, trying to access the beach, it's crazy out there. I mean, just, the geology of the site is just crazy. And you've just got this massive sloughing, and then you've got these trees with their root mats. And last year it was so wet. So you've got these trees literally sloughing off, sliding, and dropping down. And then so it's almost like a geometric shoreline. It's not a gentle, smooth shore. It's not a sloped embankment. It's just really chunky. So we've chosen we feel is a really good, appropriate spot to put these walls in and gently slope and do a little bit of minimal filling and stabilize with appropriate vegetation, because it's north facing. Again, you're not getting the decent sunshine on there. That's all part of the problem. So we think it's worth a try.
I think, yeah, I agree with that effort, that goal, definitely. But I'm thinking it could become a maintenance headache if, in fact, it becomes more of a conduit for runoff water.
It's not a gully. No. The stormwater runoff is not being focused into that. And in fact, if anything, we can do a little berm on each side to direct it away from this.
Sorry. Additionally, the neighbors directly, if you're facing the river directly to the right, have a very similar access way. Theirs is, if I recall correctly, a little bit more, I think the topography does that more naturally. However, a berm in place would prevent any of that. However, they don't seem to have any kind of channel erosion occurring through the access path of theirs.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, thanks. Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? This time I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion from the board?
Mr. Chairman, I believe the vinyl retaining walls will serve to help reduce the amount of grading within the RPA, so I support the application.
I agree. My thought is they've spent a lot of time and effort to try to do this to minimize any the wetlands, and so I don't have any problem supporting it.
Okay. Would someone like to make a motion?
Motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board Case CBPA 19-0087 at 7612 Uncle's Neck.
We have a roll call?
Mr. Roadley?
Yes?
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Hughes?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. Exception is granted. Next case is CBPA 19-0066, 3124 Sapling Drive.
Afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long here presents CBPA 19-0066. Mr. Bob Root, Williams Landscaping, has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. Richard Somerville and Ms. Carol Somerville for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a retaining wall on property located at 3124 Sapling Drive within the Bent Tree section of the Stonehouse subdivision and the Ware Creek watershed. Parcel was platted in 2007 after the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. Total lot size of this property is 2 acres, of which 48% is located within the RPA. The applicant is proposing the construction of a 65 square foot retaining wall within the RPA. The proposed retaining wall will also disturb approximately 600 square feet of steep slopes during the construction. While the applicant has not yet submitted a mitigation plan, required mitigation for this amount of impervious encroachment equates to 1 planting unit. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a retaining wall and finds that the application meets the conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14, and that the application should be heard by the board because the construction of a retaining wall is considered accessory in nature. Therefore, this request must be considered by the board following a public hearing under the formal exception process. The exception granting body is permitted to require reasonable and appropriate conditions in granting the exception request in accordance with sections 23-14. Chesapeake Bay Board should fully consider Chesapeake Bay exception number 19-0066 as outlined and presented above, and may grant the exception with such conditions and safeguards as deemed necessary to further the purpose and intent of the county's Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be minor for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval of this exception request with the following conditions incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. The applicant provide a mitigation plan equating to 1 planting unit with a surety of $250 in place prior to commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney to ensure the mitigation requirements. And that this exception request approval become null and void if construction is not begun by August 14th, 2020, with written requests for an extension submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than July 3rd, 2020. I'll divert your attention to the screen for a brief presentation. Again, the applicant request is to construct a retaining wall on property located at 3124 Sapling Drive within the Bent Tree section of the Stonehouse subdivision. An aerial photograph of the property and the project location here in the rear of the property. The topography of the property and the fairly gradient slope in nature, and natural open space as it affects the property, with RPA overlaying into it. The site plan for the proposed retaining wall extending into the resource protection area behind the deck and coming wrapping around towards the driveway. Contour is here exhibiting the extreme slope at that particular area, which can be visualized here with these pictures. Here's the approximate location of the middle of the retaining wall, outward looking the rear of the property. And showing the erosion and the mitigation efforts to combat the erosion with these rock and tarp being laid underneath. And staff does recommend approval of this exception request, given that all other necessary local, state, and federal permits are required, that the applicant provide a mitigation plan equating to 1 planting unit with a surety of $250 to ensure the mitigation planting is required, and that this exception request become null and void if construction is not begun by August 14th, 2020, with written requests for an extension submitted no later than July 3rd, 2020, 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions this time.
Can you go back to the diagram that showed the RPA? When you went through that, is there a conservation easement in there?
There is. Conservation easement is outlined here in green. It's approximately correct. I do not believe that the retaining wall will extend into the conservation easement.
Okay, that was going to be my question. All right. Thank you. Any other questions for the staff?
Mr. Long, can you, on this, I assume this topo, excuse me, this topo is the, perhaps not the existing topo, but the pre-existing topo, or is this the existing topo?
I would venture to say this is the existing topo. The slope at the property is very significant. When I reviewed, or when I made a visit to the site, I found it to be slightly different than what we had the county's topo, and to be a little more severe.
So that in your pictures, you showed the gravel and the, looked like filter fabric that had been laid on the bank, and then at the toe of the bank was an existing stone cribbing to kind of hold the gravel in place.
Yes, that is correct.
So where would you say that stone is relative to that site plan that you just showed?
Let's say the stone is approximately this area.
Thank you.
When they put the retaining wall in, will there be any need to backfill?
I believe so. I'll let the applicant ensure that that is correct.
And so you don't know how they would go about getting to where they would have to place the backfill?
I will defer that question to the applicant as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, at this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward, and state their name for the record? And we've already heard a couple questions that we have, if you could answer them.
All right. Good evening. My name is Aaron Williams. I'm with the company Williams Landscaping Design that will be installing the project for the homeowner. And I can definitely answer the question about the backfill. If I could back up to the purpose of it real quick first, and that is when you saw the photos of the river rock, those are 3-inch to 5-inch river rocks that were back there. And my understanding is when the house was originally built, that was somewhat level coming off of the foundation and then dropped off steeply. And over time, it just has eroded to the point they used to be able to walk around the house, and now it's most certain that you cannot walk around that house without holding on to something. It's definitely eroding away. And the big concern was one of the piers for the deck is slowly exposing the footer on it. So that's kind of an alarm bell. The other thing is obviously it is eroding down into that beautiful mountain laurel and the rest of the area back there. So anyway, for what that's worth. But the answer is yes, the idea is that we kind of, build the wall per the drawing that you saw, and then backfill, not level, but lessen the slope significantly, if that makes sense. And we did go through Land Tech Resources. He double-checked the topo is accurate, and then he drew what he would recommend as a stamped engineered drawing for if we were to submit for a permit. And he recommended GeoGrid go back toward the house, so it would be the GeoGrid fabric going from the face of the wall back toward the house 7 feet. And then it's in, I think, 4 lifts coming up. And the idea behind that is the GeoGrid is contained by the weight of the earth on top of it to prevent the wall from wanting to tip outward. Does that help?
How are you going to backfill?
It's very difficult. We realize that. We have looked at it from several different, ways to do it. But one is off of the flat driveway to access from that down and then dumping behind is probably the safest bet. That's what we're looking at doing. We also need to get down to the bottom in order to, work the footer and start the block courses coming up. So we will be, just beyond the wall, probably by 4 or 5 feet. for pedestrian mostly.
Make sure I understand this. This area, like in this photograph, so when the house was built, it was essentially level, there was enough land there behind it that they could walk around, and it's just eroded away, and
Is that right? Was it used to be able to walk around behind the deck? Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, 3 feet or so, and then it dropped. So it's just eroding away. It's dangerous too.
There's a house there eventually.
I'm surprised
That'd
that,
be my
you know,
concern.
people weren't,
Yeah.
when the plans were approved for the house, that they, you know, didn't see this coming.
Yeah. I am too.
And you mentioned that you were not quite certain of the height of the wall above
Oh,
ground.
yes. I should have said that. I apologize. The height of the wall at maximum is 10 feet above grade. And it's difficult to see in this photo, but you know, the grade kind of dips down and back up. So that's only for part of the wall. Some of it is shorter, and then it tucks in to lock the grade in.
Okay, any other questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Thank
Would
you.
Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? This time I'll close the public hearing. I just want to make the comment that, boy, this looks like a really serious problem, and it sort of bothers, the house, Trevor, how old is the house?
Parcel was platted in 2007. As far as the exact age of the house, I'm not
Okay.
positive, but it's very clearly, or certainly within the past 10 years.
It just bothers me a little bit that, you know, the house went through all the approval processes, and no one, you know, the county let it be built, the builder built it, you know, without realizing that you were gonna, this erosion problem was gonna develop so quickly. I don't know how do we need to change the review process so something like this doesn't happen? I don't know, something to think about.
Yes, sir.
Kind of looks like a gutter comes right down in the corner of the, it must be a porch or a deck there, or something like that. And you're.
Or your
directing water
downspouts
flow
buried.
Directly down the slope. but
That could be.
Are the downspouts buried?
the down-
Yes, the downspouts are buried. It's very difficult to see in this picture, but there's a black
Oh, I
disconnect.
see, okay.
It looked like PVC or
Yes, okay.
corrugated, whatever.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry. Back to the conversation about the backfill, and of course, it's all, you know, we have to follow the engineer's recommendation, but it helps to know that when we backfill the wall, it's clean 57 stone coming up, and then on top, we were gonna do just clean gravel, you know, so everything is permeable, just so you know.
Okay, so it shouldn't erode, obviously, it shouldn't erode out
Correct.
in
Yeah.
the next 10 years. Okay.
Hopefully longer. Thank you.
Okay. Well,
Mr. Chairman, I agree with you. I concur that there's a problem, and I believe that they've done everything they can to minimize the impact within the RPA, given the structural, you know, logistics of building this and so forth. So I'm in favor of the project.
Favor, sir.
okay. Would someone like to make a motion?
I would like to make a motion, sir, that the board vote to approve CPBA 19-0066 3124 Sapling Drive retaining wall.
Okay, can we have a roll call?
Mr. Rodley?
I think it should be 6-5 instead of 6-6.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I see 6.6 on this one, 19-0066.
Yeah, that's 6.6 is correct, and it's
6.6
76.12.
is the correct, okay. All right. I think we may have a misprint in the, in our board sheet. Okay, all right. Ms. Parman, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Roadley?
Yes?
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Hughes?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Okay. Motion carries, and the exception is granted. Thank you for coming out. Our last public hearing is for CBPA 19-0065.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, here to present CBPA 19-0065. Mr. Jonathan Kramer of H.H. Hunt Homes has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Miss Amanda Stallings for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of an in-ground pool on property located at 2529 William Tankard within the Landfall Village subdivision and the Powhatan Creek watershed. Parcel was platted in 2007 after the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990, and the total lot size of this property is 0.36 acres, of which 25% is located within the RPA. The applicant is proposing the construction of a 462 square foot in-ground pool, of which 226 square feet will impact the RPA. Currently, there is no existing community pool that residents of Landfall Village are able to access. And this is the reason why the applicant would like a pool in their backyard. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious encroachments equates to 1 planting unit. The applicant has proposed the planting of 3 canopy trees, 6 understory trees, and 9 shrubs, therefore equating to 3 mitigation units and exceeding county mitigation requirements. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of an in-ground pool and finds that the application meets the conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14, and that the application should be heard before the board because the construction of an in-ground pool is considered accessory in nature. Therefore, this request must be considered by the board following a public hearing under the formal exception process. The exception granting body is permitted to require reasonable and appropriate conditions in granting the exception request in accordance with sections 23-14. The Chesapeake Bay Board should fully consider Chesapeake Bay exception number 19-0065 as outlined and presented above, and may grant the exception with such conditions and safeguards as deemed necessary to further the purpose and intent of the county's Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be minor for the proposed development. Staff does recommend approval of this exception request with the following conditions incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. A surety of $250 be paid and in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office. And that this exception request approval become null and void if construction has not begun by August 14th, 2020, with written requests for an extension submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than July 3rd, 2020, 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. I'll now present a brief presentation. The applicant requests is to construct an in-ground pool on property located at 2529 William Tankard within the Landfall subdivision. Aerial photograph illustrating the property and the approximate location of the pool. The topography fairly flat in the rear of the property. And a sewer, this should say conservation easement as it affects the property as well. With the resource protection area extending into the limits of the property. The proposed site plan, illustrated here in yellow, will be the proposed pool. conservation easement illustrated in green towards the rear of the property, with the 100-foot RPA highlighted in red. Some site photographs indicating the general location of the pool. The entirety of the area that the pool will be located in is currently maintained in vegetated turf. Staff does recommend approval of this exception request, given that all other necessary local, state, and federal permits are required. A surety of $250 is put in place to ensure the mitigation plantings, and that this exception request become null and void if construction is not begun by August 14th, 2020, with written request for an extension submitted no later than July 3rd, 2020. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have at this time.
Could you just go back for me and show me the RPA line? I was confused. What's the line that was cutting across? What's the what's the RPA and what's the scalloped line?
I see. This is the original plat that was proposed for the original construction of the house. At the time, these were the limits of clearing. However, the applicant came in at a later date and received approval to clear further towards the conservation easement.
So what's the scallop?
This scallop line was the original planned limits of clearing.
Oh, okay, and it was, okay, but the red is the 100-foot RPA.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Mr. Long, the site plan that we have in our document, which I think is the current one, that the current proposal, if I'm following that red line, the angle of the red line and the turn, a significant amount of the pool has now been moved closer to the house and out of the RPA. Is my site plan correct in what was included in the package? There's
Yes.
an actual engineered drawing of the pool.
Yes, I apologize. That is the correct site plan, which is why the majority of the pool is located outside of the RPA.
All in the backyard, right?
Yes, sir.
Wait, it's been moved which way?
Been moved closer towards outside of the RPA.
So how many feet forward has it been moved? Okay, thank you. Thanks, okay. Any other questions for the staff?
Mr. Long, do you know where how they're proposing to handle backflowing and discharge of water from the pool?
I am not aware, unfortunately. I have not raised that question with the applicant.
Is it a brine pool or a chlorinated pool?
I believe it's a chlorinated pool.
In these situations, I typically look for, how are they treating the runoff that's coming off of this new impervious cover? And I mean, I see the plantings. I don't know if there's room. We've seen in other applications where they may propose some type of infiltration area just outside the pool that corresponds with their landscaping.
Along this marking you have for the pool, does that include the apron?
Yes, sir.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, at this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would anyone like to speak? All right, at this time, I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion from the board?
Mr. Chairman, I'll just repeat my comments. I believe that, the applicant has done what they can to further reduce the encroachment. It would have been nice to have some type of infiltration to understand how they propose to maintain the water that's being discharged from the pool, but I'm not opposed to the project.
Would someone like to make a motion?
Sir, I'll make a motion to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA 190065.
We have a roll call?
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Mr. Gusman?
Yes.
Mr. Hughes?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Okay. That concludes public hearings. We have two matters for board consideration. Mr. Long, will you present those?
Sir, thank you. The first board consideration is in relation to CBPA 18-0134, 500 Thompson Lane. It's a previously approved project and proposal that was brought before the board. Mr. Ross Thompson is requesting a one-year extension to this project. It was originally granted on September 26, 2018, but due to issues with getting the required permits, Mr. Ross contacted staff to extend this application. Staff does concur with this request with the stipulation that all permit conditions except the expiration date be reauthorized and that the new date of expiration be September 26, 2020.
Any discussion on that? Any problems with granting it? Okay, can we have a roll call? For all those in favor?
All right, Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Mr. Gusman?
Yes.
Mr. Hughes?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries, the extension's granted. And the next extension?
Sir, the next extension is in relation to CBPA 18-0108, 2917 Leatherleaf Drive. Mr. Edwin Kuzi is requesting a one-year extension to the above project, originally granted on August 8th, 2018. However, due to issues with getting the required building permits, Mr. Kuzi has approached staff asking for an extension. Staff administratively extended the approval from August 8th to August 14th, 2019 due to meeting dates, so the Chesapeake Board could act on the request. Staff does concur with this request with the stipulation that all permit conditions except the expiration date be reauthorized and that the new date of expiration be August 14th, 2020.
Anybody have any problems with that? Okay, can we have a roll call?
This is a motion to approve the extension. I'm sorry, a motion to approve.
Oh, okay, I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay.
the
Mr.
staff
Roadley?
recommendation.
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Mr. Gusman?
Yes.
Mr. Hughes?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Do we have any matters of special privilege tonight?
Would you not?
Can we have a motion to adjourn?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we are adjourned.